saw that ad on like every card I was in. I think it's for a tooth cleaner or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm not sure where
No,
you heard that. But
no, no,
most
no.
import-
Well,
I
I've been to England, so I hear it all the time. It's for the gap between the train and the platform.
oh, well, I mean, hey,
That's why it's
multiple
always saying,
contact. That's
"Mind
probably
the
why
gap,
they're
please."
that's probably why they're advertising it in the actual carts. There's
Scepter's Rune Chance and Rotwood. Oh my! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Arcane Games and Events YouTube channel. We are with Alexander Vore for yet another deck tech at a Tier 4 event that went incredibly well for him. Go figure, he's a good player, and we're happy to have him on the team. We're also happy to have him back on the channel. What's up, Alex?
always a pleasure, Bryce. Ready to cook some more deck techs with you.
And cook we shall, my friend. This list is very, very different than the last one we had you on with. That, of course, was Acilio Constella Intelligence. If you are still interested in that one, it by and large hasn't changed since the last time Alex played it for Worlds in Osaka and did fairly well with it. So check that out on our YouTube channel. But for now, we are in a much more wooded, vibrant state of being, aren't we? As is exemplified by my chroma key and the background of the video. That's right. We're talking about Florian Rotwood Harbinger, which was a deck that Alex took, but it's not your average list, is it, Alex? It's very different than, for example, the one that won Colin Kobe.
Yeah. Instead of doing the mid-range value plan, you really lean a lot more heavily on a different weapon, being Scepter, which can really change your matchup spread in a lot of interesting ways.
Well, we will get into that and a lot more. But first, Alex, I need to live vicariously through you because I didn't get to go to this event. And I do love London. It's very near and dear to my heart. It's where one of the places that my wife and I went on a honeymoon. So allow me to experience the weekend through your eyes. Give me a little mini story time.
The classic. We get there. We try and find our way to location in the venue and the hotel. Uh, as like most of Europe, the public transportation is really good. So, and I speak English, so that's a big plus compared to a lot of the other spots I've been. So hop on a couple trains, on there for a bit at the venue. Super easy, connect with the gang who's already been there. I got there a little bit later, closer to when the keynote was going on Thursday. So everybody had already kind of broken in a little bit, sampled the food that, let's just say they all had Indian food without me, and I didn't have the chance. So that's my biggest regret. But I got there, went to the keynote, kind of jumped into the tournament. They were really long days back and forth. So I didn't have a ton of time on this trip for extra stuff. But before I left on Monday, I spent some time, going around. Went to see the Parliament building in Big Ben, tried some good food, different things like that. Me and John recreated the scone picture for the sink below promo, so
Oh,
I thought that was
nice.
funny. I'll have to send it to you, and you can include it or whatnot. But I thought that was a hilarious photo that was recreated. But
Yeah, we'll need that. I actually Marcus Brown, who was there and who is a native of England, said that
yes,
John likes the stack of butter, cream, and jam the incorrect way.
I mean, look. We don't understand the culture. Okay, we just took it as it comes. So he can judge us as he wants, but yeah, we gave it our best shot.
So you're an enjoyer as well of of jam first.
Hey, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I don't think it would make a difference, but you know,
These
to
are
each
big
their own, I
deals, man.
suppose.
This is one of the biggest issues that faces England at this current moment. They don't have anything else tumultuous going on at this time.
Yeah, I suppose so. I feel like everybody leading into England's like, oh, the food, be careful, danger, whatever. But everything I had was good. So, I'm not quite sure what they were talking about.
So when you were at Pro Tour Amsterdam, Guy Cohen, friend of the show, by the way, now that I've met him in Brazil, great guy, sent you on, he and his wife sent you on a bike ride of doom. Anything similar to that experience come up at London?
Not quite. I mean, typically when I travel for a lot of these events, I prefer to not have service. I find it more immersive to like,
Mm.
be connected with reality. Um, in England, that's a lot easier because, again, I speak English, helps. But you can end up on some interesting adventures, let's call it, without, hey, I pull out handy dandy phone and I have, whatever at my fingertips. So the biggest adventure I had was navigating all the different subways and stuff, I guess, freehand. I was just like, oh, I landed, let's figure it out. And then going back with all the detours through different lines and whatnot to see some different things. Um, I can't say I'm a very proficient train user, but if I keep going to these fab events, I think I'll get there eventually, and I can't complain.
Did you mind the gap, Alex?
What's funny? I saw that ad on like every part I was in. I think it's for a tooth cleaner or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm not sure where
No.
you heard that. But
No, no, no. Well, I've been to England, so I hear it all the time. It's for the gap between the train and the platform.
oh, well, I mean, hey,
That's why it's
multiple
always saying
contact.
mind the gap, please.
That's probably why they're advertising it in the actual carts. There's an advertisement. It says "Mind the Gap." We were joking about it because I was like, "That
It's
is funny.
dental
That is funny."
floss.
Yeah, well, it's like something for in between your teeth. I was like, "Hey, they are cooking. They are cooking."
That is really funny, honestly. Yeah, I remember just being absolutely blown away by how much like just like the safety procedure on subways has like permeated into ad culture in London. I thought that was really tongue in cheek and very English.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure.
So, before we move into the actual deck, I do want to get your thoughts on the keynote because we've got an
Mhm.
incredibly hype product release coming up in high seas. Is there anything in particular you've got your eye on? Anything you were really stoked to hear about?
I think for me, I'm just excited to get into the next limited set. I have loved the limited sets from Fab over the last couple of years. I think we've really been blessed with some good ones.
Hmm.
I'm hoping that High Seas is no different. To be honest, I'm the kind of person where there's keynotes or presentations at these events. Usually, I'm like, give me the cliff notes. I'm trying to lock in,
Yeah.
especially the day before the tournament, finalize notes, finalize prep, make sure that I'm 100% ready to go, no issues like that. I actually prefer to avoid the spoilers until kind of like right when either pre-releases are happening or the premiere, and then I'll get into it at that point, just so that it's
Mm.
like a boom, here's it all at once, enjoy it. So I have not been theory building. I saw people when the first gravy card was spoiled. I saw people making deck lists. It's
Yeah,
got
yeah,
like the
yeah,
three
yeah.
cards we know, 57 generics. It's like, there's a line at which there's value doing this. I understand the hype. I
And they
understand
have
the hype,
crossed that line.
but you have crossed that line. You have crossed that line. So I am excited for the new heroes. I'm excited to see how a new class. It's been a little bit, I think, before we've had a very unique class, which is what Necromancer seems to be shaping out to be. So I'm excited to see how that pans out. But um, I am not super immersed in it at this stage, but we'll get there, I'm sure, as we get closer to the world premiere.
So the main thing that you mentioned during that was that you didn't want to let too much of this new information in. You wanted to be dialed in and prepping the night before. Being someone that goes to a lot of these tier 4 events and has a lot of experience doing it, not only doing it but doing it very well. Can you take us into that before game day prep process? Like what does your night before look like? Are you trying to just stave off jet lag, get food, make sure that you're rested well enough, or is there actual physical prep that goes into the night before?
Mm-hmm. I think that in terms of what works for people will probably vary a little bit depending on, who you are, how you generally like to prep for things, etc. There are some kind of like fundamentals, I would say, getting a good night's sleep, getting a good meal, probably waking up on time so that you can
Mm,
get breakfast, get to the venue early. You don't want to be showing up like 5 minutes before it starts. You always want to be there early. So hall opens at 8. The event might not start till 9, but if you're there at 8, it'll give you time to get acclimated, make sure that you're in the right spot, you're not missing anything, your deck list is submitted properly, especially with the new like gem software, which by the way is amazing to submit your deck list online. Um, but there were some kinks, right? Of course, this is the first big tournament that they were utilizing that. Um, but for me personally, usually I do actually like to do prep the day before. Some people like to just focus on
hmm.
fun and just say, well, I've done all the prep I can. I'm ready. Let's roll in. But for me, it's that repetition, making sure that I have all my paper notes. They're all dialed in, any last minute adjustments or tweaks for niche sideboard matchups or whatnot. So that I have those paper matchups and I don't have to think about that at all when I'm playing the actual games. I just open my notes and say, okay, this is what past me decided. Let's trust him on this and, roll with how it goes. So, this was probably one of the few times that uh, most of the team members we had, so it was me, John, Chris, and Evan, we're actually playing the same deck. So 3 of us were playing the exact same 80. And so we kind of had a little forum in the hotel room the night before where we're like, okay, let's just make sure everybody's on the same page. Any final questions, any final things like that. Do we have everything written down? Double check that the 80 cards you submitted or the 80 cards you have in your, deck box, all that kind of stuff. And then I think we jammed a couple games because it's always nice to get a couple paper games, in the in the venue or in the hotel lobby, just to make sure that you're comfortable and settled in, and you're in the rhythm of how things will operate.
Yeah, it was a pretty small contingent of the AG Pro team that actually was able to make it out to London. And I think that's mainly because a lot of us have been traveling and we all have, personal responsibilities and stuff. But you mentioned the fact that 3 out of 4 were on the same deck. And that is a rarity for the AG Pro team, I should mention, and perhaps a rarity for most teams abroad. The most interesting thing about that, though, is the one of that wasn't on this list was the one who ultimately brought this list to the attention of the AG Pro team, and that was Chris Ayali, who the kind of the last meeting we had before everybody went abroad and started traveling, Chris was like, I'm not on this list. I think it's trash right now, which
He had that opinion for a long time, I think, leading up to the list. But it is funny because he kind of like dripped it in. He's like, guys, this is kind of cool. His criteria was he would consider it if Zen LL'd. But then, the rest of us had slightly different conclusions. So
which is really curious too. We'll get into this later, but just to kind of entice people with this point, like one of the stories that was kind of coming maybe to a climax or ultimately like on a downward trajectory was Zen. Like the fact that he had not performed well at all at calling Kobe or calling Sao Paulo, and ultimately was kind of disregarded as a contender for this meta. So I wonder if that factored into your decision to bring it at all, but also ultimately, even for you, it didn't really seem like Zen was much of a gatekeeper for this list, even if he was a major meta contender.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely less Zen at the PT than I was expecting. I think the deck is strong, and it's been strong, and it's got some pros to why you would want to play it. The actual representation was lower, but I kind of came to a different conclusion than Chris, and I was like, the matchup is tricky. You need to play it differently than you would other matchups, but it's not your worst matchup. I mean, like, out of the aggro decks you could play into, it might be one of the more challenging ones, but it still feels close to 50-50. And I'm like, I can live with that. That's not a reason that's going to stop me from bringing instead.
Okay, well, we've talked around it enough, Alex. Let's go ahead and get into the deck here. We've already kind of alluded to the fact that this is not your average Florian build. It does not operate on the mid-range strategy. The main thing you're doing with this list is not accelerating your decomposes just so that you can go Grasp of the Arknight, Reaping Blade every single turn and get, 1 blue card equaling 5 value. You operate on a very different axis here. Go ahead and talk me through what is the game plan of this deck.
Yeah, and so, I guess it kind of gets into one of the reasons of like, well, why was this a deck that we were considering and that most of the team going ended up blocking, is that it's always powerful, I think, to be playing a deck that most people would not expect. That's step one. So there's value in people not being prepped for this. I think by far, most people would expect if you say, "Hey, I'm playing Florian," they're like, "Okay, cool. I got a Reaping Blade."
I know what that looks like, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know what that looks like. I know how it's sideboard. I know how I prepped. Then the game starts. You flip out the equipment. You're like, wow, okay, this is different. It's almost like what the world champion from last year tried doing, where he's like, I'm playing Fang. You're like, cool. I'm going to side for aggro Fang. He flips up Decimator. He's like, yeah, I'm fatigued. You're like, oh, that's a big problem if you didn't expect that as a possibility, or your sideboard might be wildly different. So you gain equity in that aspect. One of the other things that I like, though, and I think was critical in this format, is being able to block well, particularly against Aurora, with a lot of volatile on hits via, Channel Lightning Valley, Upper Shock, different things like that. So blocking well was an important concept. I think when you play a deck that's wanting to block more, you also have a lot more agency as a player, which is fun. If you're playing the Aurora Mirror, a lot of the time it's like, well, my card is worth more attacking than blocking. Like, it's the illusion of choice. I'm just going to resolve my hands and play them. Whereas when you play decks that are willing to block and go longer in games, I think you get a lot more decision points, which is another selling point. And And then just the matchup spread, I think, of playing Scepter. One of the things that Scepter really preys on, which was true in the tournament and something that we were expecting going in, is that most people are going to flip AB1 into you, if that, right? Like I even had some Auroras flip AB0. And if they only have AB1, so think a great example of this would be new. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would be shocked if a new blind flipped more than one AB piece into me. Like maybe they have two. If they knew exactly I was on Scepter, maybe they play all the ones they have. Um, at the point at which they're locked on one AB, your Millennium trees now become such a powerful point generator tool. Like when this is online and you're sceptering people, you're just generating so much value, so much value. And in the slower matchups where you need these big bursty turns to win, the incremental value of generating those rune chants via this, well, off like I pitch a yellow to scepter you, or I pitch a blue to set this up, scepter you, and you keep it around for 1 to 3 turns, whatnot. You're just creating the massive rune chance you need to actually win the game.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention you're chipping them, right? If they have AB1, every time you hit them for 4, they're taking 3 unblockable damage if they don't have some way to interact with that. So that was a very powerful piece that kind of drove this deck building. I would say is that most people probably would not flip it up, and even if they did, tree could still be used or just be blocked with as a 3 block card. So like the matchups where it would be critical that you extract the most value are probably the matchups least likely where they would actually flip the AB3.
And to walk it back just a little bit here, Alex, if someone has not seen Scepter of Pain before, one of the points that bears mentioning here is Scepter of Pain is technically a non-attack action, which means that it will not break any rune chance when you quote unquote swing with it. So
Mm-hmm.
you get to continue stacking rune chance long into the mid or late game. So the one thing we haven't really mentioned here yet is that this deck wants to create as many rune chants as possible and potentially go for something akin to an OTK swing or just a massive amount of rune chance. Is that right?
Yeah, loosely. I would say, at a very high level, because this deck is still playing Reaping Blade, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not playing Scepter in every matchup, but you're playing it into most of the field. You know, you're playing under two kind of high level premises of, okay, this is a very slow deck. I'm not concerned about them killing me. I have to make sure that I kill them, right? In those matchups, it's okay, I want to min max the points. You might send less attacks and send bigger pools to leak damage. So, like, maybe you only attack when you have a huge chunk of rune chance and a Knight's Blade or a Felling or something like that, where you can chip them and then set up a bigger turn, or even do a traditional OTK into some of the slow decks. And then you have a different approach against decks that like can actually kill you. Think Aurora, like you can't just sit there and draw 50
Mm-hmm.
circles against Aurora. You need to you're almost playing like a value point game against them, where you can usually end up blocking 3 to 5 cards a turn if you need to, and you kind of just play this point cycle of like, okay, I'm denying your on hits. I'm slowly decomposing. Similar to the other Florians, being online by decomposing 8 Earth cards is very powerful and critical for this list. It adds points to basically every card in your deck that makes an aura in some way, which is most of the cards in the deck. So, you're not always going for an OTK. That might be something more in some of the slower matchups, like if you queued into a Guardian, or maybe you played the Mirror and you wanted to play a kind of slow stack into them. Um, but you can also kind of have these mid-range burst turns where it's like, okay, I have 9 rune chance against Aurora. Here's 9 plus a ninth blade, 1 card 18. Like that's super valuable. They're probably going to take most of that damage a lot of the time. If they end up blocking, they give you a lot of tempo to maybe set up a tree or something like that, right? So the deck can kind of pivot along 2 axes, and you really don't want to shoehorn yourself into thinking that you can only OTK or that you should never OTK, because it kind of depends on the matchup, the game state, how the opponent's playing into, and what your win condition is. But you kind of flex along those 2 axes, is what I would say.
So the main differences that I'm seeing in this list compared to more what we've been calling traditional Florian lists is for example the inclusion of more defense reactions, more things that are going to make the game go long. Channel the
Mm-hmm.
Millennium Tree is nothing new, but the way in which you use it is very different. You talked about coming online, generating a lot of value. Normally, Florian is expecting a 1 card 5 with, 2 rune chance from the Grass of the Arknight and then 3 value swinging Reaping Blade. In this case, for example, if you have Channel the Millennium Tree out, Scepter of Pain is essentially a 1 card 9 if no arcane damage is blocked. Of course, because 4 arcane damage comes through, generates 4 rune chance, but it's 5 because Florian is online, which is a nasty proposition, of course. But also, you get to run these massive kind of game-ending attacks like Ninth Blade of the Blood Oath. You get to play things like Sonata Galaxia and Runeblood Barrier because they feed into this game plan of just stacking a ton of rune chance. You also have some cards in here that might be considered a little bit of a drawback to a normal Florian list. This is the main one that I'm thinking of, which is, of course, blue Rootbound Carapace. Talk to me about this card and like why it is functionally good in this list as compared to most lists where, blocking 2 is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, so if you haven't noticed, the blues in this list are very tight. You've probably noticed that there's a lot less blues in here than a traditional Florian list, or probably most decks. You'd be like, how does this deck function on like, I think 12-ish is roughly the baseline. It can go up or down depending on matchups a little bit. So one of the very critical things for us is you have to ask yourself a question. Well, when am I pitching a blue in this deck? Because Scepter costs 2. You're not doing the grasp into reaping line, in most of your matchups, right? So, when do you actually need that 3 pitch? And there's 2 cards in your deck which are really centered around when you want that, and that's Channel the Millennium Tree and Felling of the Crown. You would much prefer to pitch a single blue to activate either of these cards if given the choice. Other than that, most of your deck functions on yellows, which gets into some interesting deck building choices of like Siren's Call's Weaker into you, which is a nice bonus point into new and things like that. But the Rootbound Carapace fulfills that role of being a blue Earth card, of which I think we're playing all the good ones. It's kind of like the Brute lifestyle of give us a blue 6,
Yep.
please. Give us good blue Earth cards, is what most of the Earth heroes would say. And then it also feeds into that concept of, and I think this is true for just Florian in general. You want to decompose. You want to be online as quickly as possible. And in a list like this where you're using Scepter and maybe you want to save your rune chance for something or you're waiting to stack more, being able to decompose defensively and without using an action point is quite valuable. So while blocking 2 with a single card might seem like it's not valuable, this card is actually quite flexible because it can be one of your blue earth cards that gets pitched either offensively for tree or other tree that we were talking about, or it can be pitched for arcane barrier in matchups where you might do a little bit of blocking against arcane barrier, and it can be used to decompose, so you can resolve it, you can arsenal it. So it's just very flexible. You just need to be careful into null time shock, right? The card where they can name it, because I would be shocked if they didn't name Carapace
Yeah.
in. And when we get to that later, we'll talk about, it comes out in the matchup. But other than that, this card, I think, is in everything else, just for the flexibility of trying to, have that consistency across the 60 cards you're presenting in any matchup to, either if you're getting attacked a lot, you can block with it. If you need to keep 1 card to do something, it can be, your pitch card, felling or whatnot. And if you want to just decompose because you have earth cards to turn online, it gives you that flexibility as well.
So, Alex, you're saying that you can basically play a tempo game plan into the decks where you need to, i.e., Aurora, where you're sending things like Felling of the Crown, and you can block super well. Another good point against Aurora. You can also kind of do this like OTK game plan, which so far is kind of the only thing I feel like you're telling me that the traditional Florian deck can't do. So if we're saying that there is a lot of value in presenting something unexpected when somebody is, thinking that they're up against a different archetype of a deck that they think they know, what is the main value proposition in your eyes for taking this Florian versus a more traditional Florian?
Yeah, so there definitely is value in the sidestepping, putting people out of their comfort zone. But really, I think one of the biggest engines is the channel tree into Scepter. Like that, the value you gain from that is so powerful. It's so potent A lot of the really powerful traditional Florian lists might be something like, oh, I pitch a blue to make 2 rune chance with grass because I'm online, and I'll play Swarming Gloomveil, so I get a 0 for 4 go again, 2 rune chance, and I end on Blade. So, you do a 2 card 9, which is pretty powerful. This list, you're almost doing kind of like I'll block you, I'll block you, I'll block you. Okay, now it's at this point, it's relevant for me to keep this blue I drew because I arsenal the Felling and have 10 rune chance, or I arsenal the ninth blade, or I drew a ninth blade and I have 10 rune chance. You're like, okay, instead of doing kind of more, I would say you attack less turns on average, but the turns you attack are going to be more potent. They're going to be
Mm.
taller. And what that does is it gives you a lot of flexibility because there are a lot of on hits, I think, that you care about, particularly in the Aurora deck. So if they're just running hot at the start, and this happened in one of my games, I just blocked for like 8 turns in a row. And like it's turn 9 and it's like 41-40. And it's like, I went through your 3 CLVs, 2 burn up shocks. Like I might have blocked with some cards I would have rather not, but like now I can start flipping the switch, or maybe now I'm decomposed, so now I can start being more aggressive. Really, it's a balancing act, I think, for any type of Florian that you want to be online as quickly as possible, and usually filling your graveyard most efficiently involves blocking. And so being able to kind of pivot along those axes where most cards in this deck can be used defensively, you're not losing any value blocking, and it allows you to kind of pivot. Now, the trade-off to that would be that sometimes decks like this can convert larger hands less consistently than a traditional Florian list. So you give a traditional Florian 5 cards, they might be able to convert most of those, maybe Ursula D-React. Like, because of how slanted this list can be, you can have like multiple D-Reacts in a hand or different cards that just don't resolve. So if an opponent gives you full tempo and you don't have a Millennium Tree, which is probably one of your best main card converting hands, you can be in a spot where you either have to IP a card or something like that, which is a little bit of a trade-off. But most of the popular decks I think we were expecting coming into this format were not decks that necessarily wanted to like take a setup turn, take it off thing, go all in. It was kind of like, okay, we want the value. We want the value every turn. Aurora wants to go 4-4-4-4-4 every turn. Maybe they'll do their CLV setups and then go even bigger, things like that. But it's not like they're not attacking you every turn. And this is true for most of the other aggro decks and things that were kind of expected in the field.
What was expected, though, Alex, was the second most represented deck, and that was Enigma, Ledger of Ancestry. Seems like it could be a very big problem for this list. I mean, I think it's a problem for traditional Florian as well. Was that making you apprehensive at all about bringing this list?
I do think that Enigma is your worst matchup as Florian, and it was expected, I think, by most of us that it was going to be quite highly played as the second or third most played deck. Um, and I think that the interesting thing about Florian versus Enigma is they still have to beat. I'm used to in the past playing, say, Kano into Prism, and like, or I'm sure Guardian players can reminisce of playing Guardian into Prism. It's like these are 90-10 matchups. Like the stars need to align on your sides, and they need to not have specific things for you to win. I think that while unfavored, um, Florian still has equity into Enigma, and you can win at least a third of your games or something like that. And then it goes into the other aspect of like, well, okay, how do we think most Enigmas are going to play? They're probably going to be defensive slanted so that they can beat Auroras, and they probably have some kind of like grindier fatigue package, which would include 10K or something like that. That was probably the baseline assumption for most Enigma lists. I would have expected blind. Um, and if they're playing the 10K package into Florian, which would totally make sense from my POV looking at them, that means that they only have one AB in the gloves. And so there are some interesting tools that we included in this Florian list to try and give you some more equity into the Enigma and Illusions matchup in general.
Tell me
The
more.
most interesting of which I think is Looming Doom. Because this is a card that I don't know if most people have even seen it played. It's very I mean, it's a block 3 blue, which is cool. It costs 3, which seems very expensive, especially for a deck with very little blues. But it is an aura, so it means it can be tutored by Sonata if you have 6 rune chance. And it's like, you don't really want to play Looming Doom unless you have enough rune chance to fuel it up anyways. In my testing in the Enigma matchup, uh, how you usually get run over and lose is you've got all these rune chants you've been assembling, and now you've reached the point they have a board. Like this board is not sustainable to leave it around. So you attack them, as a smart Enigma player, they're gonna just take it, reset their board. Now they've got 5 cards to rebuild a new one. But the big issue is now you have Scepter and no rune chants. So it's very hard for you to recrack the board now that you've reset. Looming Doom, I found, was a very powerful bridge card to help you kind of get from the early game where you're not online with the decompose to kind of fight them for cards, especially if they're on 81, fight their auras proactively, and try and get you to that later stage of the game. Once you're decomposed online, and if the life gap is not super significant and the board gap is not super significant, I think the Florian fights perfectly fine into Enigma. The issue is getting them, right? So you need to not get blown out by auras. You need to be able to actually decompose effectively. And so in our testing, especially if the Enigma only flipped up AB1, which I would say most of them would probably do into you blind if they're doing the 10K package, this card really carried a lot of weight. You could get one or even two of these out in the early to mid game. It can really kind of grind you into a later game. And if you think about the alternative, it's like, well, if I have 7 rune chance and I attack you with Felling or something, like, yeah, that's 15 sink a card, something like that. You're gonna probably lose your board, but then you carry nothing forward. Instead of sending those 7 rune chance in one turn, you're like, I'm going to ping you for 2 for the next 7 turns on my instep. So if I'm not giving you avenues to pitch, that means every single turn you want to stop this from destroying any of the auras you might have, you have to pitch a card on my turn. And then if you only have AB1, that means you have to also prevent one via one of your other avenues of auras or prevention effects or something to that effect to not destroy, say, your Rage Spectre or your Miragai or something like that. So while the matchup was not favored, I think in our internal testing, where the gang really beat up on us and played like the worst possible cards into us because they knew what we were doing, we were still like roughly 33% of the matchup, which is not great. But like if I'm 33% into a guy who knows exactly what I'm playing and they have reps in this matchup and they're sideboarding perfectly from the start, I am definitely better than that into random player at the Pro Tour who doesn't know what I'm doing or maybe hasn't thought about this matchup as much or played, 50 reps into it. So I was okay having a slightly losing matchup into one of the most played decks because of how confident I felt that this deck was very strong into the rest of the field.
So, for people who have not tinkered around with Looming Doom, it bears mentioning just quickly giving a tutorial on how it works. So first of all, Looming Doom, when it enters the arena, destroy all rune chants you control and put that many Doom counters on Looming Doom. At the beginning of your end phase, remove a Doom counter from Looming Doom. If you do, deal 2 arcane damage to any target. Otherwise, destroy Looming Doom. So it's easy to see where the value proposition is into Enigma based on what you're saying, right? The biggest thing you have to deal with is a board of ward auras, which is oftentimes what you have to worry about with Enigma anyway. If they only have AB1, this essentially says you get to snipe an aura every single turn. Who can argue with that logic? The really cool interaction you mentioned previously was Sonata Galaxia. The fact that because Sonata Galaxia costs 1 less to play for each rune chant you control, it allows you to tutor out Looming Doom pretty reliably because you're a deck that just wants to stack and sit on rune chants. Beyond that, beyond saying, I want 6 rune chants so that I can tutor out Sonata Galaxia, with a card like Looming Doom, is there a critical mass or like a particular number of rune chants you're trying to generate before you resolve it? Or is there even, in that case, a number that is too much? Like it sacrifices too much of your damage potential because you're not going to realize it because, you have 20 counters on Looming Doom or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't want to like play Looming Doom on turn 12 and put 30 counters on it. You're like points. No. The card was
I
in the
will
list
kill
for
you
very
eventually.
Yeah. It sounds cool in theory, but in reality, it just doesn't work that way. The card was in the list for a very specific reason, mainly to give you Enigma equity. But the card is still a block 3 blue, so you can slot it in other matchups and use that effectively. I also think the card is actually good against Zen as well, because it helps fight against their Zen states a little bit more, where you have a similar problem into Zen that you do into Enigma, which is you don't really, like, you want to stack these rune chants, but the issue against Enigma is once you send them, you're naked. And right, it's hard for you to interact with them past that point. Against Zen, it's like, well, cool. I break my Kasaya, make a Zen state, and I negate all your rune chance. So if you have 30 rune chance, I just gain 30 life. So you really don't want them to do that against you. And Looming Doom kind of gives you some avenues to hit these two decks from slightly different angles. In terms of uh, answering your question, right? I think it depends on number of rune chance, state of the game, like how early or late it is, and what your win condition might be. So in the two matchups, I think you're most likely to resolve this card are Zen and Enigma. And in those cases, you would probably want to resolve this in the early to mid game. And then in my mind, 6+ counters is good. Like if I high rolled a bunch of arcane seeds or rune chant cards early and I have 9 or 10, like, I mean, I'll still send it if it's, turn 6, 7, something like that. But the sweet spot is really like 6 or 7. Like if I could get 6 or 7 counters on Looming Doom, especially against Enigma, that usually is enough to bridge you to eventually be online. And eventually now you're starting to hit them with attacks with your value engine now that, your arcane seeds is a 0 for 5 or these other cards where you can actually apply a lot more pressure to them. So it's really bridging that gap is what you're trying to do. So the sweet spot, I would say, is where it's free from Sonata, which would be 6. But if you have a couple more, that's fine. If you have one less and you really have to pay for it because there's not another avenue, like it's probably okay. But 6, I would say, is the sweet spot in the matchups we were intending to use it.
There are two more cards that I want to talk about here that I think are very, very much outside the realm of what people expect from Florian. The first one is, of course, Runeblood Barrier, and it works especially well in this deck. Talk to me about why and why the 2 copies here are justified.
Yeah, and I guess to point out the card in general, right? The card makes 4 rune chants, and then if Florian's online, it makes 5. That's pretty good for a rune chant generating card. If you look at the legal cards in Flesh and Blood that make rune chants, we're really playing most of the best ones in this deck list. Like the next best one we're not playing is probably more copies of Blessing of Occult, right? The 1 for 3 at the start, destroy it, which is a little bit on the weaker side, but I mean, hey, when you need cards to fulfill a purpose in a deck, you use what you need. But if we zoom out a little bit, right, and we talked about the macro strategies, we've been focusing a little bit on Enigma and some of these aggro matchups. There are slower matchups where you want to generate rune chants. And while you're generally not using this card for its text of preventing things, there is some niche application in the wizard matchups. You're really using this as like, okay, in matchups where I know they're trying to fatigue me or they're going to be really defensive and I need to unironically OTK them or have a really big turn at the end. Having more of these cards that efficiently generate rune chants is very powerful. One of my favorite combos with this cards against slower decks is if you Sonata tutor it and then you have go again because you had enough counters to tutor it, and then you can just dirge the Runeblood Barrier. And if Florian's online, you just made 9 rune chants. You're like, that's not bad. That's not bad. That's value. And in matchups where you need a certain number of rune chants to win the game, just having more cards in your deck that can fulfill that role is kind of important. So I would say, similar to Looming Doom, you're generally not wanting to pitch 3 to cast this, although in some spots that might be the reality. This card is really built to be tutored by Sonata Galaxia.
So since you mentioned decks that want to fatigue you, how realistic is this deck getting fatigued? 1, and 2, what are the main things you're thinking about when you know that you are up against a deck that is trying to employ that strategy? Do you have to think about, like, for instance, exactly the number of rune chants that your deck can still produce? Are you thinking about critical mass of rune chants for that one big swing? Where's your head at?
Yeah. I mean, you bring up really interesting points. You do need to have a rough idea of how many rune chants you have left in your deck. You do also probably need to have an idea of how much damage you need to send. So I would say most applicable in our tournament prep is New. New is a very interesting matchup where going into the Pro Tour, my expectation was most News would flip AB1 into me and probably be a little bit more aggro slanted. Of course, there's the possibility of CYB New and stuff like that. But going into a new blind, I would not assume CYB. So the way that the sideboard is built in here, and we'll get a little bit more into that later, is we assume it's aggro New. And so we're not playing the full stack package. We're playing a lot of D-reacts because we want to interact with their breakpoints, their tricks, stop them from doing what they want to do. But that gives you a little bit of a trade-off where if the new starts to pivot to be a little bit more defensive or a little bit more grindy with you, you can go really low on deck count if you're sided for aggro and they go more controlling. In our testing, I found that you could still comfortably win as long as you were conscious of, not blocking with trees would be a good example if you can avoid it in
Mm,
that matchup because you want to extract that value from Scepter. But understanding like, okay, they're on 30 life. Um, I probably need to have like 42 rune chance in a ninth blade or 42 rune chance in a felling or something to close the game out with my last attack. And so you have to be able to make sure that you can A, get to that threshold, and then B, one tricky thing about this deck is that just like Scepter doesn't send the rune chance, which is a pro, it can also be a con. So you do need an attack to end the game. And usually Ninth Blade is the easiest one because it's a one card 9. But if you have to keep a blue and Felling or send Plow Under, or even send one of the blue attacks like Autumn's Touch or Fruits, you need to keep 2 cards to do that. So uh, the new matchup, I think you just need to be conscious of, okay, I actually have an attack I can send to fulfill that role of killing them in the late game, and I have enough rune chance to actually get them.
mm.
Now, if you ran into a pure CYB deck or a Fatigue S style deck, you would probably side more into the stack package. And if you're sided into the full stack package, I would be very shocked if most decks could fatigue you, to be honest. Um, there are probably some exceptions, of course, depending on just how fatiguey they are. And, they flip up AB3, things like that. But even without the Millennium Tree thing, if you're decomposing and realizing it's a fatigue matchup, this deck can make like 80 or 90 rune chance with the
Hmm.
stack package. So, unless they're gaining 50 life from counter blessings or something like that, um, there's no way to survive that on a single turn cycle if they're punching you and they're just going to let you set that up. So
It,
really where you need to be careful about it is where you're not sided for that full thing. And then your opponent either pivots the gameplay towards that fatigue, um, or they, maybe you had some unlucky hands where you had to block with certain cards you didn't want to, and maybe you lost some of your trees early, or you had to play some of your enchant cards before you were decomposed, so you lost value that way. You just need to make sure that you have a win condition, you know what that is in the matchup, and then you can actually execute that later on. And the trickiest one, I think, for that would be new.
so, Alex, the AGE Pro team was not the only, couple of players or contingent that were locked in on this deck. No, indeed. The man himself, the winner of Pro Tour Amsterdam, Shoma Yamamura, also brought a variant of this deck to Pro Tour London. His, however, even though you might think, you know, these two Florians are trying to do something like an OTK or something with Scepter of Pain, their lists have got to be similar. I would say no. Shoma's list, which I have pulled up right in front of us now, is very, very different than the one that you, John, and Evan landed on. There are a couple things I want to highlight before we kind of dig into the nitty gritty. First of all, Plume of Evergrowth, which is a mainstay in all Earth heroes from Rosetta, makes its way into Shoma's list. It is absent from the AG Pro Team list. Next, one that I kind of personally don't understand, and I'm hoping you can shed a little light on, is Malefic Incantation. I saw Shoma on stream. I believe it was round 2 of Classic Constructed, and I saw him tutor these out with Sonata Galaxia, and I kind of did a head tilt. Like, how often are we attacking? Can we actually expect to get maximum value out of Malefic Incantation 9 times out of 10? He's also got yellow reduced to Rune Chant. He has one less blue Rootbound Carapace. We won't dwell on that a whole lot. One of the big differences here is the number of Summers Falls as well. Shoma is sitting on 7, including the yellows and 1 blue. Your list only has the 3 reds. The last one that I want to highlight here is one that I think is very interesting and enticing. It's Blue Amplify the Arc-Knight, which does bring Shoma's overall blue count far above yours. Currently in the 80 for the AG Pro Team, it's 13 blues. Shoma's list has 18 that it can access. So I just gave you a lot of information. Give me your overall impressions, perhaps on how this deck operates a little bit differently than ours.
Yeah, I mean, I think their deck was very similar in what it was wanting to do. We had also considered a lot of these cards. Plume of Evergrowth was one of those cards that really the matchup I think you wanted to play this in was Enigma. But with our reduced blue count, and the idea behind that would be you can recycle a Summer's Fall when they play their Chimera guy or they have a 10K or something that like you have to answer or you lose. In my mind, it just wasn't worth the deck slot. Like the 80 cards is very tight, very tight. When we're sideboarding for a tournament, we want to make sure that we have a good 60 cards into every matchup. And so tough decisions have to be made. I didn't find that the equity I was gaining from this card into Enigma was worth the slot to just play it in that matchup. And with our diminished blues, it was also less consistent because realistically, you need a blue to grab the card, and then you need probably at least a yellow to actually play the card if it's Summer's Fall or even a blue, depending on if you take Felling or something like that. So that's just a card that we personally opted to trim from our list. Malefic kind of gets into an interesting concept where we were talking, hey, we're playing most of the best cards that make rune chance. When you're online, this card says make 6 rune chance, assuming you play 3 attacks, which is fair, but it's a good rune chant tool. It has go again, right? So it helps you convert those hands. We saw some of the issues with this deck is it's hard to convert 4 or 5 card hands. Generally, I think that these types of Florian lists want to go first. So this also plays into this is a great turn 1 play, et cetera, et cetera. I think one thing in particular this card does really well that a lot of people probably don't understand, and I would bet they included in their list for this specific reason, is on 6 copies of Reduce, the card is very bad if you do not have rune chance. And so what ends up happening, very similar to the concept we were talking about Enigma, where you send your attacks to reset their board, if you just send a Felling or a Ninth Blade at somebody and you have no rune chance on the back end, and then you draw one of these Reduces, or even 2 of them, it is such a clunky card. Like one, okay, maybe you can get away Arsenal, but if you draw multiple, and you're on a list that's playing 6 here, and this card is great, right? Like if Florian's online, the yellow's a 0 for 5, in theory, right? Which the red is 0 for 6. These are point breaking cards. So I understand the reason or the willingness to want to play this. I think that Malefic allows you to end your turn that you attack them and actually still have rune chance. So cards like that is still online. That would be my interpretation of it. I think it's fine. I do think that it might be challenging to get all 3 counters of this, especially if you play it later. But I understand the thought process, right? Like we talked about playing the best rune chant cards possible. This is one of the cards that was close in our cut of like, okay, is this better than Blessing? Is it not better than Blessing? Ultimately, we decided that 6 Reduce was too greedy. We wanted to play a little bit less into certain things like Exude and the variance of not having a rune chant for it, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a very powerful card in Florian, and I think it's worth consideration in certain contexts. And that's probably how their list was built. If you go down a little bit further, I actually think there are some very smart decisions in here. So we actually were considering blue amplify the Arknight, but again, you can only register 80 cards. It's really hard.
Yep.
Our amplifies ended up being the Looming Dooms. The reason this card is being played is twofold. One, it's a 1-card hand you can send your rune chance with. We talked about how this deck has issues where, maybe your opponent's on 10 life and you have 12 rune chance, but you can't keep 2 cards to attack them, or you can't draw a Ninth Blade. Being able to set a card like this in Arsenal allows you to 1-card send an attack. So it allows you to send those rune chants, and then it's a blue block 3. This card also has additional upside because one of the cards that's probably stronger into these more defensive Florian lists is Exude Confidence. This card has 4 power. If you block Exude with this, your defense reactions are now online unless they can pump the Exude, right? So this card fulfills that role in 2 spots. And then if you look at their other blue, Arcane Crackle, you can really see that they were going into that sentiment of, hey, if we have rune chance, we want to be able to send them. So our list didn't have those consistency crutches, let's call them, right? Of like, this is how you send rune chance. So you have to be very mindful with our list of, okay, how are you actually going to send the rune chance outside of a Ninth Blade? And you have to plan around that a little bit more. I think with this version of the list they're doing, it's probably more likely that they can resolve more Malefic counters and also send those rune chants more consistently. So I totally understand the logic. And in a world where you might not need Lumidoom, say with, Enigma and Zen LLing, these cards I think are very powerful contenders to fight for those blue spots because of the role they fulfill. I actually think it's a very powerful inclusion for decks trying to do things like this.
I'm so glad you mentioned specifically this about the 1-card attacks here, because especially after that previous conversation about Malefic Incantation, I can think of a world where you are kind of set up. One, Shoma is maybe not dying with the kill shot locked and loaded, like you've alluded to our list potentially doing, 12 rune chance on the board, but you can't keep enough to send an attack. Or a world where you've set up a board state of 3 Malefics. Yeah, sure, you haven't been generating rune chance off of them every single turn, But in the later stages of the game, you go send your ninth blade. Doesn't kill him quite. You've got 3 rune chance on the board. So you send Amplify the next turn. So you send Arcana Crackle the next turn. You know, it's kind of like
Mhm.
like a haymaker or a suplex that has 3 separate parts.
Exactly, exactly. It's a lot of value, right? Like if you think
Mm-hmm.
about, I think both of these Scepter lists, they're trying to do a similar thing. They're trying to extract a lot of value. Now, most of that value comes from the defense we're playing, right? But rune chants are tough to deal with. Most of the really powerful aggro decks, outside of Zen, we're not playing a lot of blues. And even if they were, they didn't generally want to block with them or block rune chants. So if you are sending, 9, 10 rune chants because you're generating a lot of incremental value from Haunting Rendition or Reduce to Rune Chant or just cycling these cards that are triggering Malefics, right? Like a lot of times your opponents are going to take it unless it's lethal, right? So it's almost true damage, even if it's not literal true damage.
So there you go, folks. 2 looks at the same list, same variant of Florian Rotwood Harbinger for 1. Let's go, however, back to Alex's list that he took to PT London. From there, Alex, let's go ahead and dive into your matchups. Let's get a little bit of a clearer picture of the mosaic that made up your Pro Tour. Okay, so here they are pulled up right in front of us. You started the day off right, my friend. You didn't even have to play that first match.
I mean, hey, I will take it a little unexpected. I think that this alludes to some of the issues they might have been having with the deck submissions and things like that. I think there were some issues where there were a couple buys in round 1 for various players, which shouldn't happen, but I was one of those, I guess, fortunate ones you could call it, where, I got my first 50 minutes to, look around and see what was playing around me, I guess. So that happened. After that, I won my next 4 in a row. Um, the new matchup we touched on a little bit when we were talking about the decks. This is the only matchup I played the entire tournament where I almost decked out. I had 4 cards left, but like I said, I was kind of going in with the expectation that like this could be close. But
Mm-hmm.
I had 52 rune chance. And my plan was I had this ninth blade I had pitched that I was going to do, and then if that didn't fail, I had 2 blue autumn's touches. So I had like 5 cards in deck, and the new opens Bonds of Agony. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of dangerous because if I block this the wrong way, they could take my cards and it's really bad. So, I opted for I'll say no blocks. They can take a card, but they can only take my ninth blade or my Autumn's Touch. So I still have an attack. And generally in these slower, grindier matches where they try to pivot to fatigue you, you have enough health that they're never going to kill you. You just need to attack them. So, I set it up in a way where, he took the ninth blade from me, but then I just hit him with Autumn's Touch. And, 52 rune chance plus 5, and you're on 30, you die. So tricky matchup, or I mean, I think a very technical matchup, but I felt good into new. I thought it was good, even if they pivoted more fatiguey on the traditional list, as long as it wasn't CYB and you were cited for aggro. I felt like it was a pretty good matchup for you. And let me tell you, one of the benefits of playing very few blues, we touched on it briefly, Siren's Call. It is so satisfying when a new player plays Siren's Call. You show them your hand, you're like, I've got no blues. That sucks to be you. This is the only new I played the entire tournament, but 2 out of 3 of their Siren's Calls missed. So some nice extra value. Can't complain about that.
Pretty epic. I do want
Yeah.
to jump back to the buy round for just a moment, Alex, because I think this
Mm-hmm.
is something for me personally can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So I have 2 questions regarding the buy round. Number 1, does it kind of get in your head to like do all of this prep and then not actually play your round 1? Because honestly, for the most part, I usually view it as a crutch, like a kind of having to get all the energy up, have the endorphins going, get the adrenaline pumped for like a really important in tournament, and then like have an anticlimactic start to it really kind of derails where my head's at. Where do you stand on it?
No, totally fair. And I mean, if you think about this, London compared to where I normally am is 8 hours ahead. So if this tournament's starting at 9 a.m. on my normal time zone, that would be 1 a.m. So, and you also take it from the other aspect of, well, that means in round 2, you're going to play somebody who probably played and beat somebody, right? So they're fresh off a win where they actually, they shuffled their deck, they were ready to rock and roll, all that kind of good stuff. So you're a little cold going into that. So there are some cons. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sure you can't complain with a free win. I mean, a win's a win at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day. So you can't go wrong with it. But there are some cons to, you're maybe not as warmed up, you're maybe not as locked in because you haven't played that first game yet. So there can be some drawbacks. But hey, I have no control over it. I take what Jim pairs me with. If I have a buy, then I make the most of my time and I see what other people are playing, maybe shuffle my deck a little bit more, and just prepare as best I can for the rest of the rounds.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about this round one pairing, I took the liberty of looking up who it would have been, and it was Ed Knight from the Card Guys, the Guardian aficionado from that crew. How do you feel in general with this deck and a Guardian? Assuming that Ed actually brings Guardian, I'm just doing it
Hmm.
based on his online persona.
Probably a fair preconception. Yeah.
Sure. Assuming it's probably a victor, right? Based on the incredibly low amount of Jarl that we saw represented at PT London. Shout out to you, Marcus. Sorry you got boned. Um, do you think you take that match?
I think that generally speaking, this deck is very good into slow decks like Guardian. Victor, if you're playing Victor, one of the things you want to do is clash, and we know that, so we're just not going to attack you, and that's going to suck that you're playing Trounce and Test of Strength and all these blocking cards that we're gonna. Victor's one of the decks where you would probably lean towards more of a true OTK, and it's like, well, hey, if you're not clashing, you're not going to kill me in time. Probably is the real answer, and we block really well if we need it, so you kind of have all the flexibility to resolve your own chance and kill them. And this is true for Jarl as well, where they don't really have a strong way to interact with you, drawing 60 circles and sending it at some point.
So there you go, folks. Even though he technically has a buy on the sheet in front of you, he would have won it anyway. So don't ask any further questions about it.
That's what we tell ourselves, right? That's what we tell ourselves.
In this first the day one of Classic Constructed, you also saw two Auroras, which I'm sure you were happy with. There's no reason to bring a deck to a Pro Tour if you think it's not going to shape up to the best aggro deck, and Aurora definitely is that. The thing I'm more interested about is this round 4 Riptide. You went up against an X and O Riptide, and how does that matchup play out?
So this is one of the few matchups that, when you sideboard for a tournament in Flesh and Blood, you want to write down a sideboard for every hero. But in practice, there's a lot of heroes that generally don't see play. I don't write a Betsy sideboard in my sideboard guide, but I know roughly what I would do if I ran into a Betsy, because I'd probably assume it's more fatigue leaning. Riptide falls into that category of he's not explicitly written on the sideboard. And in my experience, I think there's two kind of ways you can play Riptide. You can play a very fatigue style Riptide, or I've also seen very aggro Riptide. So two very polarizing things, kind of similar to what we're talking about. They actually pulled us up, I think, for the backup stream game, which they may or may not have used. And I didn't even know the guy was playing Riptide until we got there. He's like, yeah, I'm playing Riptide. I'm like, oh, wow, you're 3-0 with Riptide. And I spoke with the guy. I actually played a lot of Brazilians here in day one, but this was the guy who bubbled. I'm not sure. You might have actually met him, Bryce. He was the guy who bubbled on Riptide in Brazil.
We had him on stream. He was incredible. He absolutely rocked a Vin set.
Very, very, very fun guy. All my opponents were great to chat with and stuff, but
awesome.
He knew what he was doing on Riptide. He basically said, yeah, I started playing Riptide. I only play Riptide. So I was a little scared. The way I sideboarded for it is I assumed it would be Fatigue Dreadbore, because I figured that if I was sided more Fatigue and he was aggro, that would be more advantageous to me than if I'm sided with all these D-reacts and he flips up Dreadbore. I'm going to have a miserable time. So he did end up flipping Dreadbore. And so thankfully I did side out like 9 of my red reactions. And so that helped me a lot. This game was very interesting. There was a lot of like, I pass, he sinks his D-react, he passes like back and forth. He threw his CNCs at me early. But, again, in the line of Guardian, if you're playing a fatigue deck into this, it's really hard to stop me from drawing a bunch of circles and winning the game. So pretty tough matchup, I think, for that type of Riptide into this type of Florian. But it was scary. I'll say, it's always scary when you get to good records and you play against decks that you're like, you're playing that deck. Okay, that's interesting.
Which is exactly what you are trying to do to the rest of the
field,
field,
exactly. Same concept.
And I think shout out to Anthony Pham, who is the resident Riptide truther on the AGU Pro team. I think his fascination with that deck probably is what seeped that Dreadbore knowledge into the back recesses of your mind, because that was going to be my main question. Like, did you bring D-reacts into this? Because I think 9 times out of 10 you can expect Riptides to flip Dreadbore, and man, if you have 9 D-reacts, you could really have a bad time.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I still had D-reacts, so the Dreadbore got value. You have to arsenal them, and then they have to not have Remorseless or things like that. But having a smaller density of that in your deck helps you a lot. You don't want to be IPing cards. So, having one that you can arsenal, that's fine. Drawing 3 in the same hand, you can't use any of them, big problem. So that sideboarding kind of adjustment ended up being correct and helping me have kind of a comfy game in that regard.
Anything else you want to mention about round 3 and 5 versus Aurora? Anything unique there?
Yeah, I think the one thing I might just touch on is we talked about how this deck's weaker matchup is Aurora. I think both forms of Florian, or sorry, not Aurora, Enigma. Both forms of Florian, I think, are weaker into Enigma. I think that the Scepter Florian actually has a better matchup into Aurora, especially if they're not flipping full combo. Like if they flip full combo, the game is still close and it's fine. Obviously, if they get a really crazy combo early, you might still end up losing, but this is probably true for any Florian list. But if they're not playing the full combo with 3 Flicker Wisps, the Iron Weave, the Gold Helmet, all that stuff, like the matchup is like almost a free win for you, I feel like. And we'll probably get into it as we get to it, but I played 5 Auroras in this tournament. And this is probably true for most of my games. A lot of the CC games I won on 7, 10 plus life. So I would call pretty comfortable wins. Like,
Yeah.
if you're winning on 7, 10 plus life, that means that, you never got into the nitty gritty of, I needed exactly 4 block here, or I needed exactly this. It means like you ran your deck through the cards, you did the thing you wanted to do. Most of these Aurora matchups fell into that category if they were very comfy wins. I don't have exact notes on what every one of them flipped up, but I played against a wide variety. I played against some full combo Aurora lists. I played against some 0 AB, very consistent aggro lists, very similar to the game that Pudding Tam played against Shoma actually in one. I actually played Pudding in one of the later rounds in day 2. So I ran against the same setup and did manage to get that one. But so I played against a wide variety of 0 AB aggro, full combo, somewhere in between, some AB, partial, etc. I think the common denominator was none of them flipped AB3 into me, which I kind of expected. I mean, you would have to know beforehand and have it, which they probably did. But even if you wanted the AB3, you would then have to give up the Iron Weave if you're doing the full combo. So some tough decisions for them. But yeah.
So, Alex, you are, of course, a limited aficionado. So, we do have to go over the draft record. You were the featured drafter for the first three games. At this point, you're going in undefeated. How was it being the featured drafter, especially given the number of reps that you put in? I believe Brian Gottlieb on stream said you were over 80 drafts in at this point.
Yeah, I had like 90 some, I think, by the end of my practice. A lot of that before Memphis, but still a good chunk between that and the PT. I felt really good on the format. I thought it was, I enjoyed the format and I was comfortable on the format. Being the featured drafter, that's always fun because it means I can go back and watch it after the fact, which I did do. To give it a look and see, okay, would I have changed anything? Do I agree with my logic still? Because that's a very important concept of draft. I feel like we always talk about this, Bryce. It's still true. Draft is very important. You're not going to win tournaments split like this unless you have a strong draft record. And, I think that there's a huge edge to be gained relative to other players in the draft format. And I think it's, one of the aspects of improving your thing is being able to review drafts and see, okay, should my logic change? What different things can I take away, et cetera. So being the feature drafter was cool. I think my first draft was a little bit on the weaker side. Reviewing my thing or reviewing my pot overall, I think that the way I drafted was fine. I think it was fine to go that way. A little bit of things didn't line up for me in the sense that I ended up having an Arachne on my right, and there wasn't really much I could do about it. And then I ended up having an Arachne 3 down, and then Fang ended up being underdrafted, even though I had passed some stronger reactions. And then to have Fang be the underdrafted deck and then play what I thought probably, even in hindsight, I think my round 1, so round 6 of the pod was against the strongest deck in the pod.
Yeah.
And then round 2, round 7 is probably against the second strongest deck in the pod or close to that. So I had some tough pairings. The games were close. I thought my deck could squeeze 2-1. That's what I was trying to do. Ultimately, I did go 1-2 with some tough Syndra variants in the last one. We won't go into super details since we're focusing more on the deck tech. But, as with every format, there's a little bit of variance. The variance just wasn't quite in my way for the draft pods this time, but I still ended up going 3-3, which is okay. Realistically, you probably want to be going 4-2 plus to top 8, which is ultimately, if I was able to squeeze one more win out of one of these pods, we would have been in contention for top 8, but was not meant to be this time.
And maybe it's for the best, given the representation of illusionists in the top 8.
I was ready with the tech,
You were.
especially Prism. We didn't talk about it, but God, Prism. When I play Kano and I'm pairing in the rounds, and there's that one Prism player and 49 of the matchups I want, and I hit the Prism player, I'm like, I'm playing the Prism tax. I'm playing Florian. I see all these Prisms that are doing well. I'm like, give them to me. Make
Yes.
them pay the Florian tax. They never pay it. God is cruel. We do what we can, but for Worlds, we did really good in draft, sucked in CC. For the PT, we did really good in CC, kind of sucked at draft. So, third time's the charm. Next time we'll do either, I guess, good in both or bad in both. Hopefully the former. But
That means PT Singapore surely is going to be an
sure,
Alexander Vore victory.
surely.
We just want to clear up for the graphic in front of your eyeballs, ladies and gentlemen. Alex did draft Arachne Web of Deceit for both of these drafts. The records are, corresponding to the round number. So it's Arachne Web of Deceit for 6 through 8, Arachne Web of Deceit for rounds 9 through 11. How about your mental state going into the second draft, Alex? I mean, you are one of the most prepared people in the room. Despite that, you went X and 2 as the featured drafter, and you have to go back and do it the next day. Did you watch over the VOD immediately the day at the end of day 1, or did you just kind of try to keep your head clear, go back and do what you can do?
Yeah, I didn't review it until after the tournament was done. So it was not a day one review. But you know, I as with any draft format, you want to build a process for how you draft. My process and logic going into the tournament was unchanged after pod one. So I still knew what I wanted to do. I still wanted to draft my seat. I think in pod two, I ended up with a much stronger deck. I lost to a Fang that had 3 fealty on turn 2 and had a shelter in his deck by 1 point and 1 card. So it was very close. The guy, fun note, I guess, the guy who 3-0'd our pod in the second pod got second place at the PT. So, I mean, hey, that's always a consolation prize. We had good players in our pod. It was fun. There were actually, day 2, this is true for the CC too. The Flesh and Blood tournaments nowadays, it is crazy. I think in my pod 2 game 1, I played against Shamir. So we were talking before the pod. It's like, I have Shelter in my 3 packs, right? He's like, no, I have Shelter in my 3 packs. And then, of course, it was somebody else actually had Shelter in the 3 packs. But, we went in with a fun mindset. We drafted it the same way. Built that logic. Executed it. And I'm satisfied with how I drafted, I think.
I'm glad you mentioned this too, Alex. I'm gonna veer off course a little bit here, because if there's one thing I know about you is that no matter what the stakes are, you always seem to be having fun. When you're on stream, you're gabbing with the person across from you. They throw out an attack reaction that kills you. You're sitting there going, "Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense." Like rifling your cards or what. Like, how important is it to access the fun despite being at these high level tournaments and despite being basically on the edge of glory?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's very important. I mean, different people have different views on this. At the end of the day, I can play top level competitive clean Flesh and Blood while still having a fun time. And I play Flesh and Blood not because I'm seeking to win every tournament I play, although I wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm playing it because I love the game. I love having fun. I love playing it competitively. I'm there because I want to be, not because I'm trying to min max every tournament I play at or whatnot. So it's very important to me. If I wasn't having fun playing Fab, I wouldn't play it as much as I do. So, I think it helps that a lot of the people in the community are also very great to be
Mhm.
around. I think that we're very blessed to have the community that we do in Fab, where most people are very approachable, very friendly. Most people try to play in the true spirit of the game. We're not really trying to shark people or things like that. And I'm really proud of that for our community. And it really enhances that ability to have fun, even though the stakes might be really high for an event.
I could not agree with you more. And I don't think I could have put it better as well. So thank you for that, Alex. Let's proceed on to day 2's Classic Constructed. The Aurora train continues, my friend. These are the three of the total of 5 that you saw in this tournament. One of which is a loss. What the heck happened there?
hmm Yeah, and so coming out of the draft, going 2-1, I'm now X3. I'm pretty sure to top 8 or even have a chance to top 8, I have to win every CC game. So it's like win or die from round 1. Um, This Aurora game was very interesting. It was actually a pair up. So I was X3 and I got paired into an X2, Michael Yasker, who ended up top 8ing. So very good player, as were all my players on day 2. Like I think against day 2, I played against Michael Yasker, Pudding Tam, Sam Sutherland. I played against some really strong players in day 2 in CC. Um, and this was just a really close game, really competitive. He had full combo. He had a really strong combo early. We got to the end game, and he beat me on 1 life. So very close game, really tight. He played it well. I think with the way the deck was shuffled, I played it well. It's just, sometimes you get there by the tiniest of margins, and I didn't either have enough 0 for 4s when I needed them, or I wasn't able to preserve enough life or do different things. But if you can get them to 1, it was a close game. So a very close one, but we ended up losing it, which killed our top 8 potential. But of course, you know me, we're playing it out. We want to win every game we can. So we jumped in. We had a couple more games against Aurora where we were able to take it. Overall, that put us at 4-1 against Aurora in the tournament, which I thought was a great matchup for this deck. Obviously, Gem Gods were on our side. We ended up playing Zero Enigma, which, I mean, I didn't snipe Prisms, but the Enigmas didn't snipe me, so I guess I have no room to complain. But yeah.
However, the last round of CC, you face off with the deck that convinced our team captain to not bring the Florian deck. It's Zen.
Mm-hmm.
How did that matchup go? Was it a nail biter, or did you dispose of them pretty easily?
It was a nail biter. I mean, it was all this was the Sam Sutherland. He was playing Zen. So this is the only round in the entire tournament I actually resolved Looming Doom, and I got Omega value. So I had an early Looming Doom for 7 counters, and it did 13 damage to him. Which, hey, that's great. He did Zen State me later in the game and deflect 10 rune chance plus whatever he got on the next turn. So he did eventually get it, but the critical thing in this matchup is to not overplay into the Zen State. And by leveraging Looming Doom, I was able to do that. This game was very close at the end because he did hit me with a Cosmic Awakening for 20. But we did get there by not losing too much value to the Zen State, which I think is your primary lose condition in this matchup. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're able to play around that and not give them a ton of value, you can generally close the games out against Zen.
So what are the nuts and bolts of that? Because to a layman, I'm sure giving a Zen State 10 value as you did sounds absolutely insane. But of course, we're talking about a deck that can, as you talked about earlier, stack up 52 rune chance.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, they want to. The reason that the Zen State is good into you is because it prevents rune chance because they're instances of 1 damage. So if you were to say know nothing about the matchup and you stack 60 rune chance, you're like, awesome, I'm going to kill them. I've been saving these rune chance. They take that chi that they've had in Arsenal and a chi that they have in hand that they've been IPing or whatever. They're like, boom, I make a chi. Or they maybe just hold a chi that they've already transformed from earlier. Like, boom, I make the Kasaya token. I deflect all those. You now lose the game. So the trick is against a good player, you have to give them value. I mean, unless they just don't have it, right? You have to send like these mid-rangey attacks, almost like how you would play into Aurora. It's like, okay, I have 9 rune chance and a 9th blade. Boom, here it comes. Because you don't want to stack super hard until they've used that Kasaya. Like once they've used the Kasaya, then you can maybe stack a little bit more if it's more advantageous for you. But Looming Doom is really nice because I was able to turn those counters in the early game into pings for 2 on my turn, and then I would intentionally not hit him with arcane damage. So if he wanted to block 1 damage with his AB1, he'd have to pitch an entire card on his turn to block 1, which is not a very appealing value proposition. So it presents some hard decisions. One thing we also didn't talk about, I guess kind of niche, it was relevant for this. Your Millennium Tree amp does work on Looming Doom. So Looming Doom for 5. Just keep that in mind. That's relevant. It also goes into the maybe you don't have an attack to send, you can still Looming Doom them for 5 with your amp or whatnot, which is fine. But that's the gist. I mean, you really just don't want to overcommit and give them too much value from the Zen State. But a good player is always going to get some value into it because Zen State is good into Rune Chance. It is what it is. And that's what they're looking to do with their Kasaya. So you just have to try and minimize that damage.
Well, folks, let's go ahead and take a look once more at the deck itself. There are two things I want to draw our attention to. The first is that unlike Alex's Acilio deck, which we covered several months ago at this point, it was taken to Worlds in Osaka. This list has a much more complicated sideboard plan. So we're not really going to go over it here.
Mhm.
But this deck is available in public on the Arcane Games and Events Fabry account. It'll be posted there. We'll also post it to our Discord and our Blue Sky so that you can go ahead and take a look at it. When you access it, Alex has done all of the heavy lifting for you. He's got buttons galore. He's got them for Acilio. Heck, I even saw
Mm.
Max written on one of these things. So you
Yep,
will
yep.
you will go into any one of your matches with absolutely no guesswork to do other than how to make decisions in the moment. The other thing I want to talk about here, Alex, is this deck is kind of already outdated in a way. We've talked about the fact that its main drawback is that it has a difficult Enigma matchup. Enigma is about to be gone because she performed so well at both the Pro Tour and the Calling that were happening that weekend. So she attained 150 Living Legend points. She only has 11 to go, which will probably be very easily attained during ProQuest season, which is coming up at the end of the month. So let's talk about the future of this deck, Alex. If you thought it was good before, does it get even better now?
So it's kind of a trick question almost, because you would think the answer is yes. And the answer probably is yes. But this deck is also a much larger known quantity now, which does play against it a little bit. The way that I prepped for the PT was kind of with the state of this deck at the time. If this deck is more popular, and you could tell, like, if you review our sideboard or whatnot, you should flip AB3 into Florian as a hedge, probably, because if they're not doing the Scepter thing, I mean, depending on what hero you are, right? Like in the case of us, we just get to play the chess piece over the Earth one, which is not a huge drawback. Like losing some embodiments in the mirror is a small price to pay to be able to block tree multiple times. So people are probably going to have more prep, better sideboard practice, etc., into this deck. But you are right that you would think from a meta perspective, this deck does sit in a good spot. So at the start of this video, right, when we looked at Shoma's list, some things I'd be considering are: do we even need Looming Doom anymore if Enigma's not in the meta or Zen is not in the meta? Because those are really the two matchups that I was wanting the card in and why it was in the list. And maybe instead of those, now you're playing some of those other blues, like Amplify the Arc-Knight would probably come in over Crackle first. Of okay, these are more cards that turn off Exude. These are more one-card attacks that allow us to send Rune Chance in the end game. So I think that this style of Florian is fine. I think that this is probably a solid deck to play at like the ProQuest level. Like for your local ProQuest, you could totally show up with this. You have a ton of agency. This reminds me of decks like Oldhim back in the day, where you get to make all the decisions. You get to ask the hard questions. Your opponent has to respond to it. And depending on how they answer those questions, you could just win games for free. And that's a very appealing skill feeling, I think, for most players. And if it was true for me at the Pro Tour, it's probably true for most of your ProQuest local games, I would imagine. So I think that this deck has some potential, but we'll have to see how variants of this deck perform while it's being targeted, right? It's the spotlight problem. When a deck is successful and it does well, then it gets targeted. It's why the format for the PT involved a lot of 0 for 4 DVXs, because people wanted those breakpoints against Aurora to stop CLV, burn up shock, etc. If a deck like this is popular and people are bringing more tools, or maybe they plan to fatigue you from turn 0, you have to be a little more careful, because you'll be asked harder questions that you have to adapt to earlier than I would have had to at the PT. So I think that this was a nice breakout. I mean, I was very satisfied with the deck we picked. I thought it was strong at the PT. It was a good breakout deck where not a lot of people were accepting. I think even though Florian was the third most played deck, I would probably venture to say that 75% of the Florians at the PT were probably playing Reaping Blade only. So even within the PT, if you were playing multiple Florians, you probably wouldn't expect this. One huge benefit, not that I played any, is I think that this list is close to an auto win into default Reaping Blade Florian. It's ironically is your best matchup, probably. I think they just can't win. But that's interesting. So I think we'll see what happens. right? As the meta adapts to considering this as a contender in the meta, maybe the deck becomes weak and it's no longer correct. Or maybe it's fine playing into AB3 fatigue. You can still draw those circles and get there. It's an interesting contemplation, and I think the list will adjust slightly. I definitely like some of the ideas from some of the other Florian lists, and with Looming Doom no longer being required, I would definitely be considering some of those strong blue options that allow you to both have duality in sending attacks with one card, and then maybe some also niche applications in like turning off Exude or something like that.
Well, Alex, now comes the most important question of the video, the fun factor. Since fun is so important to you as not only a competitor, but also just as an avid flesh and blood player and an all-around good guy, does this deck scratch the itch of fun in Flesh and Blood?
Oh, yeah. You can trust me with 100% confidence. I will never register a deck I'm not having fun playing at an event. I don't care if it's the World Championship. I'll play Reinhardt because it's fun. I'll play Max. I'll play whatever. This deck is fun to play. I enjoyed playing this deck thoroughly. It was fun to pilot. I think you get a lot of decisions. You know, most of the time when I'm playing, I want to say I'm generally leaning on a more aggro style deck. So playing a more blocking deck is maybe a little bit different than what I would normally do, but I've done it before in some spots, like when we were playing a more control big Dragon Dromai, when everybody was playing Redline and some of those, stack Kino builds where maybe you want to go 12, 13 turns, etc., and play a longer game. I enjoy the aspect of that, and who doesn't like to have like 40 rune chants in play? Like when you don't have enough dice to represent your game state, you're doing something right.
As long as you're avoiding the judge call, right?
Yeah. I mean, make sure you have enough dice. But when you're like, okay, I got to pull out the second pack of dice because I didn't think we had reached this point. Like that's when you're really getting there.
That's awesome, Alex. Well, thank you so much for taking something spicy to the PT and representing the AG Pro team a way that only you can. Can we take a minute to shout out the teammates that helped you test and also construct this list?
Of course. I mean, the entire Arcane Games and Events team is extremely helpful in all of our prep. I mean, out of the four of us that played, three of us top 64, two of us top 32. So I think our team overall did really strong. That's probably in part due to a lot of the help and assistance we received from the team. We mentioned that Chris had kind of floated this as the initial proposer of the idea, and then me, Evan, John, and some others kind of took it a little bit further, refined it, tested it, kind of came up with the pros and cons of what we should do. And then a lot of teammates helped us in testing certain matchups. So a huge shout out to the entire team. Definitely could not have done it without them.
And Alex, if people want to see more from you, where can they find you on social media or elsewhere in the internet?
Yeah, I am not a big social media guy, but I did create a Blue Sky since that seems to be the trend for fat players. So I'm on there. You can find me, Alexander Vore at Blue Sky. Up there with Bryce. We like bantering back and forth on some different things. I'm not super active, but I post some. I'm very approachable. Whether you meet me in person at an event, you reach out to me on a social media website. Come join our Arcane Games and Events Discord. If anybody ever added me in the general channel, was like, hey, I have a question for you. Could you please help me with this? More than willing to help. We love our community. Always appreciate people coming up and being grateful for the content we produce. So, whether it's Discord, Blue Sky, in person, always feel free to reach out. I love talking with people in the community. We talked about how great the Fab community is. Yeah, I like to think I'm approachable.
One of the hallmarks of a good community member in my eyes, Alex, is if we were to do a thought experiment and make every single person in the community of Flesh and Blood an Alexander Vore, would we be better for it? And I think in your case, the answer is a resounding yes. Sure, we would be a lot louder, but I think we would be better for it.
Yeah, louder for sure, but in a good way, probably, hopefully.
Without a doubt.
Chris might be disappointed, but
Well, Chris would be you, so he would be fine with it.
There we go. It comes full circle.
Always. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this Deck Tech, Alex. Thanks for performing so well once again at a Pro Tour. If you are looking for what is next for Arcane Games and Events, we have two events, two Arcane Games and Events Open Series coming up next month, in the month of May. On May 24th, it'll be Arcane Games and Events Los Angeles. The very next day will be AGE New England. That one will not be streamed, but the one in LA sure will be. That means more high octane flesh and blood action coming at you from AGE every single month down the line. We are not going anywhere, and we are so excited to bring and evangelize this game that we love so much. With that all being said, folks, thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time.